So this is very pleasant. So what's going to happen is I will introduce each writer. That person will come up and read for 15 to 20 minutes. Then I'll introduce the next writer. And we do hope to have a little time for conversation. If we don't, of course, the beauty of the festival is you can visit with them one-on-one while you're having them sign your book or something like that. So our first writer, who would have guessed that when Warner Bair II moved back to his ancestral home of Deer Lodge after retiring from a long career as a practicing attorney, a prosecutor, and a judge in Arizona, his new digs would inspire a new mystery thriller? Good question. Warner's first novel in the Anonymous Man series, Kismet, was set in Arizona and California. Now his Deer Lodge home has inspired the second book, The Manse, published just this summer. The Manse has already been selected as a pick of the list by the Mountain and Plains Independent Booksellers Association. Please welcome Warner Bair.
Thank you. Whenever I'm introduced, I'm always wondering who that guy is they're talking about, until I remember that my kids still call me chopped liver. So, I want to thank you, Ken, for the kind introduction, and also mention Kim Anderson and Judy Klein, who facilitated our being here today, and we appreciate that, because I know I speak for my fellow authors. And I also want to recognize the guy sitting back there, and I guess that's a red jacket you're wearing there, Dale. My publisher, Dale Burke from Stony Dale Press, is here, and I want you to know he made a great sacrifice, because he told me that just before we were starting, it was the kickoff of the Grizzly game. So we got a tough act that we're up against here. And finally, I want to thank all of you for coming to share our love for the thriller. It's a great genre. Thriller writers don't always get the accolades, but we do have the comfort of knowing that next to the romance novel, it's the most widely read genre. So that helps a lot. Kismet was mentioned. That was my first book. It's about an unnamed protagonist who has lost his wife, and he decides that to quit having to stare down the neck of an empty Scotch bottle, he better do something with his life. So he takes on a missing persons case in Los Angeles and figures that's a good way for him to kill some time. Obviously, since this is a thriller, he kills more than time as he finds himself taking on the mob, some corrupt DEA agents, and a Mexican drug cartel. Most significantly, though, I didn't realize this when I was writing it, he reconnects with his lost love, his first love, Charlotte King, or Charlie as she's affectionately known, the girl he'd loved and lost when he'd gone to Vietnam. A lot of series authors will tell you they never intended their first book to be the linchpin to a series. They wrote it thinking it would be a standalone. Problem is, when you get finished with characters that you find engaging, you wonder what's going to be next. What will they do in their lives? What will happen? What other capers will they find themselves getting involved in? And that happened to me with Anon and Charlie. Fortunately, my readers had the same response, so that's, I guess, how a series is born. Reunited, Anon and Charlie moved to Montana, to Anon's ancestral home in Deer Lodge. Some lady I was talking to, her, she's, Deer Lodge, where's that? And I said, well, it's about 81 miles to the east. And I'll let Anon tell you kind of what the story arc is for the Manse, in his own words. I'd been married before, but being married to Charlie was like eating your first ice cream cone. Your eyes lit up as you savored the taste while you tried to lick fast enough to keep the dribbles off your chin. It was a good thing I was in shape because my woman never stopped running. Now she discovered a Victorian house in Montana she wanted, so what the hey, I had to buy it for her. It needed a lot of work and a lot of money. And I had to buy it from the local crime boss, the guy with the big goon who didn't like me. Fortunately, he liked Eldon Bishop, a psychopathic killer and the leader of the local outlaw motorcycle gang, even less. That was a point in my favor because I might need the local godfather's help after Bishop made a move on Charlie and I discouraged him with a 6-iron. Now, Bishop had decided to even the score by killing me. Worse, he decided to kill Charlie too, after he raped her. Bishop had used the law before to get away with murder and figured that with my background as a lawyer and judge, I'd make the mistake of thinking the law could protect us. He figured wrong. Of course, he didn't know how much I loved Charlie and what I was prepared to do to save her. So I thought Bishop and I would do our death dance far away from the maddening crowds, alone, in the mountains. Great plan, but I should have known Charlie wouldn't stay home sitting by the fire with a good book, not my woman. In this excerpt from the Manse, Anand talks about a faithful dinner. And I had to do a separate script for this rather than reading from the text because I had to be politically correct and make sure I didn't mention some of the 4-letter words in there. To celebrate having the basic systems, heating, plumbing, and wiring on the Manse completed, Charlie and I decided to have dinner at the local steakhouse. Charlie was telling me about our most recent conversation with Cousin Stacy. When I tensed and she stopped talking, noting the look of concern on my face, and she turned to see what I was looking at. Shorty, the smaller guy from the incident at the store in Phillipsburg, had entered the restaurant and was standing just inside the door, squinting in the light, looking around. He was still dressed in dirty jeans and an equally dirty sweatshirt with the sleeves cut off. His bare, muscled, and heavily tattooed arms were hanging loosely at his side and he was flexing his fingers. He bobbed his head occasionally as he stood there, a wild look in his eyes. Although it didn't register at the time, I later congratulated the primitive side of myself for making sure we had been seated at a table where I would be sitting with my back to the wall. Shorty was not alone. His companion was a small blonde girl, maybe early 20s. She had on jeans, only hers appeared to be clean, a four-penny tank top that simply emphasized she had virtually no breasts at all, and a blue bandana wrapped around her throat. She had spiked, bleached hair, the blonde streaked with pink. She had rings in so many places on her face and head that it would have taken me an hour to count them all. Shorty finally got around to looking in our direction, and when he did so, a smile appeared on his face as he clearly recognized us, and then he began to amble slowly over to our table. I quickly looked around and concluded that with all the people in the restaurant and the girl in tow, this wasn't a killing visit, just a I'm going to kill you visit. I glanced at Charlie and she looked back at me and I could tell by her expression that she recognized Shorty, but she said nothing and she picked up her cup and took a sip of coffee. When Shorty arrived across from the table from us, without waiting, he pulled out a chair and sat down. The blonde stood next to him, obviously not sure what to do next, until Shorty noticed and he motioned for her to sit down in the last available chair, and she attempted to do so, but had trouble moving the heavy chair away from the table. Shorty shook his head, reached over and yanked the chair back from the table, and the blonde jumped aside to avoid being hit by the chair, and then she carefully sat down as Shorty turned to me and said, "Well, Judge, how are you tonight?" He emphasized the word judge, apparently to let me know he knew I had been a judge. If he expected me to react to it, he was going to be sorely disappointed. Instead of answering his question, I asked one of my own. "Where are your manners, friend?" "What? You didn't introduce your lady." His puzzled look was replaced by a sneer as he said, "And I didn't introduce me either. This here," and he gestured at the girl, "is Roxy, and my name is Eldon Bishop. It's a name that very soon you," and he looked at Charlie, who was staring at him with undisguised displeasure, "and your missus here will wish you never heard." I stared at him some more, and he stared at me, two bulls sizing each other up before they locked horns, and then I said, "That sounds like a threat, Mr. Bishop." He clapped his hands, not loudly like a baby does, palms barely touching, and responded, "Yeah, they said you was smart. I think you got it." Nobody F's with me. Nobody. You got lucky back there that day in Phillipsburg, and now your luck is going to run out. It's payback time for me and Cholo. What's that short for? Chocolate? Bishop leaned back in his chair and regarded me with a stare that could best be described as reptilian before he said, "Oh, you be a smart mouth, because I'm going to kill you, mother effer, and I'm going to kill her." And he looked at Charlie. "Do you believe that, a-hole?" I nodded. "Well, I believe you just effed up enough to try it." Try it? Try it? Let me tell you something. You think you live in a safe world. You got the law to protect you, all that stuff. Well, I got my own set of laws, and my laws say you die. No pigs or a-holes in black robes are going to stop that from happening. As he finished, he was nodding his head, his eyes even wilder as he looked at me. I reached down and raised my coffee cup and took a drink. I could kill him right now, right here. I could take the dinner fork or the knife and jam it right in his eye. I could throw the hot coffee in his face and kick his chair out from under him and calmly walk over and snap his neck like a chicken. He was probably carrying a knife. I remembered the big one he'd worn in Phillipsburg. I could disable him in one of several different ways and take his knife and slit his throat. I thought about it. I wanted to do it. I wasn't mad. In fact, I was quite calm. But I saw him for exactly what he was, a psychopathic killer. Killing him would be easier than killing a rattlesnake. At least the snake had some reason for being on the planet. Bishop didn't. I looked at Charlie. I looked around the restaurant. A couple of people were looking in our direction, but most of them were assiduously avoided looking at us. I smiled. "Civilization, Bishop? Don't talk to me about civilization. I know how thin the veneer is." I was about to respond to him. Pages stuck together, and so we had to leave the restaurant. No. I was about to respond to him when Charlie did the most extraordinary thing. She had been calmly sipping her coffee, looking from Bishop to me as she followed the conversation. Now, she suddenly reached over and took Bishop's hand in hers. She tightened her grip as he jumped and tried to pull his hand away. She looked at him the way a mother does who's being forced to discipline her child, with firmness but compassion. And then she spoke. "Mr. Bishop, I want you to please listen to me. I know you don't really know me, but I want you to believe with all your heart and soul that what I'm about to tell you is the God's honest truth, because your very life depends on it. I'm a scientist by training, and although I believe in God, I'm not a superstitious person. I want you to know that. I understand you've been hurt, and the way you look at things, you think you've lost face, and that's not part of your credo, part of your rules. I understand that, but I want you to know that if you threaten us, if you really are serious about wanting to harm us, you will die. You'll die, Mr. Bishop. My husband will kill you." Bishop looked at Charlie with an incredulous expression, and he slowly withdrew his hand from Charlie's and looked at me and said, but without any force, without conviction in his voice, "Your wife is crazy, Judge." Undeterred, Charlie said, "No, I'm not crazy, Mr. Bishop. I found I have this ability to see into the future when it comes to my husband and me. I get premonitions. Well, I don't mean I can tell you what we'll be doing any particular day, but I know right now, with absolute certainty, that if you try to kill us, you'll fail. And Mr. Bishop, you'll die. And whatever else you may be, whatever else you may have done, I don't want to see you die, Mr. Bishop. Please, don't do this." Charlie looked so intent, so serious, the bishop actually shuddered before he recovered, stood up, and muttering about crazy broads, turned and walked out of the restaurant. The blonde Roxy sat mesmerized, and she continued to stare at Charlie for a moment after Bishop left. And then she nodded, stood up, and came around the table and leaned down towards Charlie. I tensed, ready to jump her. But as she leaned close, she whispered something I couldn't hear to Charlie, and then she turned and followed Bishop out of the restaurant. As we left the restaurant, walking along Main Street, I put my arm around Charlie and looked to be sure she had buttoned her coat against the chill air. I knew Bishop meant what he said. I had no doubt of that. Many years before, I had prosecuted a case where 2 young girls had been raped by a biker gang. I took the case through a week's trial, and I was getting ready to put my 2 star witnesses on the stand when they both disappeared. The judge was forced to dismiss the case. The biker defendants walked. They never found the girls, but the cops and I knew what had happened to them, and we knew they would never be found. They were dead and buried. The case had continued to haunt me, and it haunted me still. In preparing for the case, I'd immersed myself in the culture of what the media calls the outlaw biker gangs, and I knew about these people. They were seriously effed up, and they would kill you without hesitation. Before I'd found Charlie again, I wouldn't have cared. I lost my first wife, my first Charlotte, a wonderful, caring person I'd loved very much, and for a long time afterward, I didn't care whether I lived or died. But now, I had Charlie. I'd lost Charlie originally because I'd gone off to fight in Vietnam, believing, at least in the beginning, that although I hadn't chosen to go there, maybe I could make a difference. Instead, a part of me had died in the brutality of combat, and ever since, violence continued to find me. Now, it appeared violence was finding me again. I hugged Charlie. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "Yes, I'm fine." That was quite a speech. I meant every word. "Yes, I know you did. Do you think I'm crazy?" I chuckled. "No, you're one of the sanest people I know." She turned into me, we stopped, and she kissed me fiercely. Then we turned north on our street and continued walking home. As we walked, Charlie took my hand and said, "It's just like when we were in Tucson and you and Mike had to rescue Kyle and his father. I knew with the surest clarity that you would return to me, that you would be all right, and we would have our life together. And I now know that this guy is going to come after us, just like he said, but we're going to survive, and you will..." Her voice trailed off for a moment, and then she said, just above a whisper, "Kill him." I didn't know what to say to Charlie when she talked about us like this, which she did from time to time. I only knew that so far she had always been right. I wasn't superstitious either, and I didn't share her abiding faith in the hereafter, having seen too many good people die in hideous and unfair ways, often before they'd even had a chance to live their lives. Until Charlie, I believed that our ability to really control our lives was simply an illusion, and that what happened to us was left to the whims of fate. Charlie, she had done more than restore my faith in life. She had begun in my life a series of events that seemed somehow preordained. Meeting her again after so many years apart, recognizing that our love had never faltered during the years, even coming to this place. It seemed to me I was on a roller coaster, hurtling down the rails, my fate in the hands of some unseen entity, lever in hand, determining whether I would careen around the next curve or fly off the tracks into oblivion. Except the uncanny thing was that Charlie seemed to know what my fate, our fate, would be. Perhaps, without her even knowing it, she was the one with her hand on the lever. As we walked up the front steps to the manse, I realized that what I knew right then was just one simple thing. I would do what it took to survive, to cling to life, not so much for me, but for Charlie. And I would kill, as I've been forced to do in the past, to protect her. As I unlocked the front door, I remembered to ask Charlie, "What did the blonde babe say to you there at the end before she walked out?" Charlie stepped through the door, and as she began removing her coat, said, "She said she hoped I was right, and that you would kill Bishop." Thank you. And let me tell you, that's harder to do than you think.
Thank you, Warner. It was wonderful. I love listening to that. It reminds me that one of the roots, the most important elements of storytelling is suspense. I gotta admit, I want to know what's going to happen to those characters. Our next reader is Rick Craig. Rick spent 12 years teaching kayaking, mountaineering, and other backcountry travel skills around the western United States, as well as in Mexico, Alaska, Chile, and East Africa. He knows mountains. And mountaineering. Rick's stories have appeared in numerous literary journals, and he's won a fiction fellowship from Writers at Work and the Chicago Tribune's Nelson Algren Award. The Last Mountains, a high-altitude thriller, is his first novel. Please welcome Rick Craig.
Thank you all. Thanks for coming. I was trying to figure out why all of these detectives that we run across in mystery fiction and thrillers have personal lives that are so deeply messed up, or they always seem to be damaged in some significant way. And I realized pretty quickly that there was an obvious answer, which is that those people who seem to have their lives together in every possible way are every bit as dull and annoying as fictional characters as they are when you have to sit next to them at some dinner party. Which should be a sufficient answer, I think, but being a writer, I had to push it far enough to squeeze a metaphor out of it. So I came up with the idea that the mystery is operating on two different levels. That, you know, I'm well aware that it's a plot-driven thing and you've got to deliver some action and suspense, but I think we're also looking for these the people who lead us through this to, in some important way, point towards a deeper mystery or give us some indication of what it might mean to live a meaningful life. And so somebody who's a misfit or a drug addict or suffering from incurable illness or something like that, we give them a little more trust in terms of guiding us through those kinds of questions. That was my theory, anyway. So the guy who will reluctantly become the detective figure in this novel is grew up in central Wyoming and kind of as an adventurous teenager discovered mountaineering. It's not my story. You might guess from the introduction, but I'm not actually much like this. He found that he had the physical abilities and the attitude to take that to a really high level, which he did, pursued it with zest and passion, and built his whole life around becoming a climber. And I think it also suited his personality, and you might even say his soul, so well that he felt like he was doing the thing he was meant to do. In fact, probably was one of those annoying people who seem to have their whole life figured out. And then while climbing in the Himalaya, he developed a condition known as high-altitude cerebral edema, which is a dangerous swelling in the brain, similar effects to a head injury. It's caused by the extremely high blood pressure that people often experience when they're adjusting to altitude. And that threw him off his game a little bit, and then it recurred each time he went back to extreme altitude. Got a little legacy of brain injury there, and maybe loss of confidence that spread out into other aspects of his life. Maybe that's the Tiger Woods effect. Things go wrong and everything else falls apart. So his marriage went bad. He tried getting away from the mountains and having a mainstream career. It was miserable. And then we find him at the opening of the book back in Wyoming, trying to recapture that idea of doing the thing that he was meant to do. He's working for the Park Service now as a climbing ranger, responsible for backcountry safety and rescue stuff. And the thing that mystifies him the most as he tries to get his life back together is fatherhood. He has a young son who you'll meet quickly who mystifies him and is the main thing that he wants to put right in his life, is his relationship with this kid. So I'm going to read to you from the opening. I do have the traditional mystery beginning in which a body is discovered in the first chapter. I don't have quite enough time to get you to that because I'm going to waste about 8 or 9 pages on relationships and characterization between these guys. I hope it won't be too dull. The settings, we'll say, but I hope. Tom Hadley watched his 11-year-old son stagger toward the summit of the Grand Teton. Ben's legs quivered as he followed his father's footprints across the final patch of snow, and after every 4th step, he stopped to lean on his ice axe. The eyes that looked over the tops of his glacier glasses were glazed, and he leaned so far into the wind that when it lulled, he nearly pitched over sideways. For once, Tom knew his son's struggle was real. More than 20 years as a mountaineer had taught him the difference between someone who is at his physical limit and someone who merely thinks he is. Ben came even with his father a few yards before the summit, and Tom offered a water bottle. Ben stared at it with a look of profound nausea. "I'm good." The boy's trembling voice gave the lie to his attempt at machismo. "Get a few sips in you," Tom insisted. "Best thing for the altitude." Ben grimaced as he forced down a swallow. Tom swept one arm toward the summit, just 24 easy steps away. "Why don't you take it from here?" In his guiding days, Tom had led nearly 1,000 clients to this summit. When conditions permitted, he always let the neophytes lead the last few steps. And today's sky held no hint of the afternoon thunderstorms that could turn the peak into a death trap. The trip up the Exum Ridge with Ben had been slow, but the June light would give more than enough time to descend to their camp on the lower saddle. And this early in the season, there were few parties on the mountain, so they would have the summit of the Grand to themselves and the time to enjoy it. But in the awkward tangle of their relationship, enjoying the summit together was likely to be the crux of the climb. Ben lowered his head and plodded toward the summit with the grim determination he had shown since they left the trailhead the day before. Tom hadn't brought his son into the Tetons to toughen him up. He had more important things to communicate here. But he couldn't help liking this unexpected fire in his frail mama's boy. Ben's birth had been the final nail that fastened the coffin lid over Tom's career as a guide and serious climber. Now that he was back in Wyoming, trying to rebuild that lost life as a climbing ranger in Grand Teton National Park, Tom wanted to put the failures of the intervening years behind him, which mostly meant connecting with the timid, distant child who, like everything else during the years he had tried to live Allison's way, had always baffled and frustrated Tom. Allison had relented on the custody arrangement to give him Ben for the summer, so now he had his chance. With no idea how to begin, he had done what he always did when life overwhelmed him, headed for the mountains and hoped for the best. Tom came up behind Ben and laid a hand on his shoulder as the boy stood on the summit platform, staring northeast toward Mount Owen and Tiwanaut. They stood there a long time, slowly rotating to take in the sweep of the land below them. Tom meant to point out each peak of the Tetons and the contours of the Snake River Valley, as well as the Gros Ventre, Absaroka, Wind River, and Wyoming ranges east of them, and the Sawtooth and Big Hole ranges to the west, the aching sprawl of sunshine and shadow that mapped his interior life. He had already pointed to Gannett Peak and the Wind Rivers and turned to Ben to begin his father-guide routine, but stopped when he looked at his son. Ben stared at the land spread below him with an expression so awed he seemed to have forgotten to breathe. It felt like the moment in a fairy tale when the child discovers that the magical world he had always hoped for actually exists. As he looked into Ben's face, Tom realized he had been wrong about this spread of land and light. It wasn't his inner map, at least not today. It was Ben's. Tom doubted that the actual world around Ben had ever aligned so closely with the way the boy saw things. "I'm going to tuck out of the wind, Benny. Take your time. I'll be behind that rock." He snapped a photo of Ben by himself and an arm's-length portrait of the two of them with the valley spread below, then left Ben slowly revolving on the summit as he ducked into the lee of a boulder to spread the lunch. When Ben joined him, he looked dazed, happy, and ready to sleep. Tom cut a hunk of summer sausage and held it out on the blade of the knife. Ben winced. "Not hungry." "That's the altitude. Choke something down or you'll run out of strength." Tom felt great and had to stop himself from eating everything. He was glad that Ben's body responded normally to altitude, unlike his, which always felt perfect until it suddenly started dying. They sat chewing thoughtfully, staring at the world below them until Tom, feeling that he should, said, "There's coverage here. You want to call your mom?" "Dad, you might recall she's a little down on this whole mountaineering thing. I don't think this is really the place she wants a call from." Tom shrugged. "There was a time she loved it here. She wouldn't have let us have the summer together if that didn't still mean something to her. You know she only has to give me 2 weeks." Allison had turned violently against climbing after Tom's repeated near misses, but he had been clear how he intended to spend the summer with Ben, and she had eventually relented. "Come on, Dad." We both know she only sent me here to get me away from certain influences. Influences made Tom think of the way he had found Ben at the airport when he first picked him up. In baggy dark clothes with a backward baseball cap jammed low and a hoodlum slouch. Tom had found it comical. Ben was tiny, a scrawny kid showing no sign of impending puberty. His attempts at machismo, the thug regalia, his experiments with swearing around his father, even his determination during the climb, seemed like a clumsy groping toward manhood by a kid who wasn't sure he would ever get there. Tom passed another hunk of sausage to Ben, who had found his appetite. Seems like you know more than I do. Suddenly wary, Ben tipped his head back until it rested against the boulder and studied his father through slit eyes. She didn't tell you about the pills? Pretty sure I would have remembered something like that. They stared at each other, Ben cringing and Tom scowling. Spill it. Ben's confession came immediately, a high-pitched spasm that was both a squeak and a blurt. I stole some pills. The burst of anger Tom felt was directed mostly at Allison, who seemed to have played him. Stole them from where? Ben peeked up at his father. Grandpa Bill, he takes a lot of OxyContin. In case his father was stupid in this regard, he added, it's like popular on the street. Here was another target for Tom's anger, his favorite. His former father-in-law and, during his miserable sojourn in the corporate world, employer. The vindictive prick who had pushed his high-powered lawyers on Allie to make sure Tom ended up broke and cut off from Ben. Tom took a deep breath. For a rig worker's son from Casper, Wyoming, he had come a long way in his life. But as a father, he often reverted to the ways of the harsh male pecking order he had grown up around. With a child like Ben, who cried in terror of any loud noise until the age of 5 and who turned inward at even a hint of disapproval, this tendency had always backfired spectacularly. It was one of the things Tom was hoping to change this summer, and he was certainly getting his chance. Fortunately, just then, Tom was thinking of Ben as a climbing partner, and he was in the habit of loyalty to his partners. And with his anger shunted onto Allie and her father, whom Tom just couldn't picture as a victim, he bypassed his normal reaction. What did you do with the pills? Ben stared at the ground beside him. There's this guy. He looked at Tom as if considering how to explain something that was over his father's head. I don't have any friends, you know that, right? He might have been looking back at his life from some time in the future, explaining what he had been. This guy, he's 15. I guess you can figure out what kind of 15-year-old would bother with a little kid who doesn't have any friends. He's like half bully and half loser. I call him the loser. Like the Minotaur. When I'm with him, he just pushes me around and I hate him. I tell him to fuck off and he laughs at me while I run away. Ben had taken his sunglasses off in the shade of the boulder, and Tom saw Allison's pretty blue eyes and delicate features in the boy's wounded look. Except for the heavy eyebrows through which he looked up at Tom, there was no trace of his father's ruddy, hawk-nosed face. But then I miss him, Ben continued, and go by his house. When I show up, he laughs and says, "You're totally my bitch." Tom was seized by an urge to snap the other kid's neck. The drugs were for him. He sells them. He told you to steal them? No, it was my idea. Because he always laughs at me when I try to do something. He didn't laugh when I brought him 100 tabs of OxyContin. Did you eat any? Ben considered. You know those commercials with the egg? Your brain on drugs? Eli, that's the loser's name. He tells me I'm the one kid in the world whose brain is actually that fragile. Like, sort of pretending to discourage me, but actually kind of daring me, if you see what I mean. Tom saw. He saw the other kid perfectly and was now committed to snapping his neck. And did you? Ben looked down at his hands. Basically, Ben's eyes disappeared into a clenched face. I licked one. I guess he laughed at you. He didn't even bother to laugh. He just rolled his eyes and was like, "Dog, that is so you." The picture formed clearly in Tom's mind. Little Ben in his suburban thug regalia, trying his hand at the dark side with a bottle of stolen pills, then erasing his success by failing to either take the dare or stand up to the one making it. That must have stung. Ben nodded. So I took it to the next level. I popped the pill, but I was so scared I puked. Tom covered his face with one hand and kneaded his temples. His reaction to this tale of bad judgment pierced with self-awareness was similar to the young drug dealer's response to Ben's failure with the pill. That is so you. So your mom decided to send you out here. Actually, I don't really know what she decided. She's never quite mentioned the pill thing. What? I mean, not in so many words. The day after it happened, there was a phone call from Grandpa Bill with him doing a lot of shouting and Mom sort of begging him for some time to figure out how to handle things. After that, she did a lot of sighing and asking if there was anything I wanted to tell her. Talking about seeing a new counselor and asking what I thought about spending the summer out here. Ben was wincing again, ashamed to be the one telling Tom how their summer together had come about. Jaw hanging slack, Tom stared east toward the Wind Rivers. That, he said flatly, is completely chicken shit. I was going to tell her, Ben whined. I was almost ready. I'd meant your mother, Tom growled. He doubted that even Allison's New Age books about parenting the gifted, troubled, spirited child would support avoiding a problem that was right under her nose. Sorry, that's for me and her to deal with. Your problem is with this kid. What are you going to do when he asks you for another bottle of pills? I was thinking I might try avoiding him for about the next 1,000 years. That'll just make you look scared. I am scared. All the more reason to go straight at it. Break his nose. Dad? Can't say that. It's primitive. I can too say it. It's probably the only thing that will solve your problem. Look, Dad. 1, he's bigger than me. A lot bigger. 2, he counted the points on his fingers. Mom will figure out you told me to do it, and she'll use that against you. And 3, he's already pretty messed up. If he gets beat up by a little kid like me, he'll take an assault rifle to school or something. Okay, 1. Just sucker punch him when he calls you a bitch. Use a roll of quarters. 2, that's my problem. Tell her to call me and we can slug that one out. As for 3, I don't even know whose problem that is. I'm not going to be able to solve anything for you if I have to worry about other people's kids too. He sighed. Just hit him. Think of it as an exercise in building self-esteem. Your mother will like that. Of all the things that had been good about that day with Ben, the laugh he gave then was the best. It made a lot of things seem possible between them.
Great dialogue. Excellent dialogue. Also, it's interesting how writers anchor their work in their lived experiences, right? They can tap into that. Very interesting. Our third reader, Craig Lancaster's first novel, 600 Hours of Edward, was born in the crucible of the National Novel Writing Month, that wacky November free-for-all of furious writing. There weren't enough F's in that sentence. Let me try that again. No. He completed an entire first draft, nearly 80,000 words, in November 2008. In October 2009, it was published by Riverbend Publishing of Helena, and then it went on to be selected as a Montana Honor Book and a High Plains Book Award winner. Excuse me. The Summer Sun, published earlier this year, is his second novel, and it's also headed for the spotlight. It's a finalist for the Utah Book Award, which is very cool, which will be announced next week. Craig's waiting. We're rooting for Craig. Please welcome Craig Lancaster.
I'm glad that Rick dropped a couple of curse words there, so I'm able to say that Warner is a much nicer guy than I am for shielding you from them. But Rick is every bit the rascal that I am. So my book, The Summer Sun. Oh man, I shouldn't have done that. I was marking my place. It's not really a mystery or a thriller, although there are some mystery elements to it. Okay. Okay, I've got it. And I'm going to read from the middle of the book in the hope that the selection that I read will cause you to want to know how they got there and what comes next. The basic story is Mitch Quillen, the narrator and the protagonist of the book, has come to Billings to see his father, from whom he's been mostly estranged over the past 30 years. And a couple of things have driven this. One is that his father has begun calling him at his home in California and not really saying anything. And his wife, from whom Mitch is rapidly unraveling, has taken this opportunity to solve two problems by pushing him out of the house toward his father and to hopefully have him fix this mess that has been dogging his entire adult life. So that's where we are. And at this juncture, Mitch and Jim, his father, are in a car headed toward a central Montana town that I entirely invented called Split Rail. And Mitch is driving this. He wants to go to this town that Jim lived in when he was a little boy. And he wants to see it again. And so they are on their way to Split Rail. I clutched the steering wheel hard, relenting only after the pain hit my shoulders, and Dad sat indignant in the passenger seat of my rented Ford. We rode in silence those final few miles after the turn toward Split Rail. The well-worn state highway dropped behind us, and we climbed a sandstone butte stacked layer upon layer like a wafer cookie. The deeper we pushed into the country, the angrier the road to Split Rail became. How long since you've been out here, I asked. As the curtain of silence fell, I exhaled. Long time. I don't remember the road being this bumpy. People here don't pay their taxes, he said. I smiled. All my life, that had been his stock answer for anything that wasn't right with the world. Roads in bad shape, people don't pay their taxes. No emergency clinic in the neighborhood, people don't pay their taxes. Dropouts plaguing the high school, people don't pay their taxes. For everything I wished that were different about the old man, I found comfort in just as many things that never changed. We fell silent as I chewed on whether to push the question. I decided to risk it. No, seriously, how long since you've been here? I held my breath. It's got to be 3 years at least. Helen and I came out and saw Charlie once in a while, but that didn't last after she got sick. Charlie looks good. Yeah. He told me Jeff's in prison. What happened there? I don't really know, Mitch. He doesn't say, and I don't pry. Maybe you shouldn't either. My ears singed. I doubled back to the topic of Split Rail. 3 years. Who knows? Maybe the place has changed. Split Rail never changes, Dad said. I hadn't been to Split Rail in 28 years, not since that last summer with Dad. I soon found, though, that Dad was right. We rounded a bend and started down the backside of the butte. The Split Rail lay out before us, the same as I remembered her. The tripod water tower with the red top, the block letters spelling out Split Rail. The main drag that took in a gas station, the livery bar, the small grocery, the farmer's credit union, the tin cup diner, the Grange Hall, Split Rail School, and the weekly paper, The Standard. Of the 400 or so residents, just a handful lived in a smattering of clapboard houses in the town. The rest spread out across the country like cattle. Literally and figuratively, split rails sat at the end of the road. The dusty lanes that shot off the main strip led to farms and ranches of various shapes and sizes. Those who wanted to get goods to market would have to look south to Broadview and the railroad. For a night on the town or to load up on supplies, Billings was the ticket. Living in split rail wasn't easy, and from what I recalled of the people who called the place home, they liked it that way. There were rewards for the hardy few, though. On a clear day, like the one gracing us, you could scan the horizon and see many mountain ranges. I took in the scene as I nudged the car into town. Beautiful, I said. Yeah, Dad sounded as awestruck as I did. I cruised up the main drag until it petered out, then turned the car around and made another pass. The diner was still an hour from opening for dinner. We saw a couple of cars at the grocery. Other than that, Main Street kept quiet vigil. I've forgotten the way, I said. You're going to have to give me some directions here. The way to where? To the ranch. We're not going to be able to get in there. Let's go take a look anyway. Dad didn't fight me. As we passed the Standard, he pointed to his right, and I turned onto the gravel road. Soon enough, split rail proper was behind us, and as we headed into the maze of ranch roads that ring town, for the first time since we had started our little day trip, my stomach began churning. I thought about Dad and his ranch and how bittersweet it must have been for him to think of it, much less see it. Dad lost it in 1983, 6 years after he'd bought it in a fit of joy and a cascade of cash. Mom had predicted that ending a year or two earlier, though I don't think she was particularly proud of her perspicacity. Her signal that things had turned badly for Dad came when my child support checks stopped in 1981. He ran late for a few months, rallied, and then stopped altogether. Mom and I badly needed the money, but she wasn't the sort who would have withheld his right to see me over it. That mattered little. The plug had already been pulled on my visits. I had never come back this way. Years after Dad lost the ranch, when Mom was gone and a bit of long-distance détente set in between him and me, we talked about it during one of our semi-annual phone conversations, and Dad had sloughed it off as his decision. The ranch at 2 sections and more than 1,200 acres was too big, he said. He wanted a life closer to town, so he sold out and moved to Billings. The public records I sought later suggested something different, bankruptcy. When the energy crash came, he had stayed on top of the ranch mortgage for as long as he could, trying to patch together a living with water well work. Eventually, though, he succumbed to the wave of creditors who took his rig, his ranch, his boat, his life's work. He limped out a split rail with a failing Ford and that old holiday Rambler. When we got the news about Jerry, Dad lived in a trailer park in Billings, subsisting on unemployment and odd jobs. Mom offered to buy him a plane ticket to come out for the funeral, a gesture she didn't need to make and one she couldn't afford. I told her as much, but she said she and Dad had made Jerry together and that they ought to see him off together. In any case, her offer was moot. Dad declined. He might have sat there in squalor until the end of his days had he not met Helen, who lifted him up and gave him another shot at prosperity, or at least comfort. I thought of all this as we bounced along the gravel road. It always seemed to me that Dad had gotten a fairer shake than any he had offered the rest of us, but now I wasn't so sure. We were coming up on the access road that led to the old ranch house, and I felt sorrow for this man who had once had so much and now had so little. Feeling sorry for him pissed me off. It wasn't why I'd come. The steel gate, put in by Dad to dissuade trespassers during his long absence, was locked up tight. We climbed out of the car and rested our arms on the gate as we stared across a newly tilled field abutting it. Looks like they're getting ready for wheat planting, Dad said. Yep. We looked a while longer. Do you miss it, Dad? This? Yeah. He chewed on the question for a few seconds. I wondered if I would be sorry that I had asked. I do, sometimes. I think about this place a lot. Why? A lot of things happened here. This was the last place I ever saw Marie. That's no big loss. True, but it happened just the same. Don't you ever think about that stuff? Think back to what happened and wondered what might have been? Dad scoffed. Things work out the way they work out. I've told you that before, Mitch. You live with your head in the clouds. There isn't anything that fixing the past can do for you now. I kicked at the ground and turned toward him. I'm not talking about fixing it. That's not what I said. I'm talking about trying to figure it out, to see what can be learned. Guess it's easier to be dismissive about the past if you don't care. Well, I care. He wheeled around and faced me. Sounds like you've got something to say. Why don't you unburden yourself and say it? Maybe it was that word, unburden. It was so similar to what Cindy had said before I left. The man has some sort of burden. Maybe it was the years of carrying my memories around, alternately trying to sort them out in my own head and fighting with myself over whether to drop them all on Dad and make him account for the things he had done. Whatever the case, I decided right there on that dirt road that if he wasn't going to own up to whatever was bothering him, to this great mystery that had brought me out here away from my home and family, I'd damn well spill my grief. Split rail, to my mind, was a poetic scene for the confrontation. Okay, I hate you for what you did to us, to Mom, to me, to Jerry. I hate you for 3 weeks from 28 years ago that no matter what I do, I can't get out of my head. I hate that she's gone and he's gone and you're the one who's left. I hate for all the time I've carried this around, you won't even see me, won't let me in, won't help me deal with this. Even now you're doing the same old thing. You're jerking me around because that's what you do. Dad quaked. He balled his fists. His eyes bore in on me. Are you fucking done? He hissed. Not even close. I can't forgive Marie. She drained you, but you deserved it. You deserved to lose what you lost. Fuck you. Fuck you right back, Dad. I can't blame you for Mom, but I'm glad for every day she never had to see you, never had to be with you. I'm happy that when she died free of you. You don't have a clue what you're talking about, Dad said. His body twitched. I kept going. But Jerry, I said, and I saw my father's jaw dropped. You didn't plant the bomb, but you killed him just as sure as if you put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. Dad swung a right hand that grazed my neck as I bobbed out of the way. I dropped my shoulders and rammed his midsection, and the breath blew out of him as his back hit the steel gate. He wrapped his right arm around my head and pounded my back with his left hand, but I ended that by wrestling him down. He moaned as his back hit the ground. I scrambled on top of him, pinned his shoulders under my knees. He kicked wildly but couldn't dislodge me. You're going to listen to me, I said, spittle hitting Dad in the face. Mom and I watched Jerry's coffin come off that plane. We took him back home. We watched him get buried. Why couldn't you have been there, you piece of shit? Why couldn't you have owned up to what you did to making him leave us? You're such a coward. You have no idea how many times I wished you were dead. Screw you, Dad said. Fuck you back. He strained beneath me, his face burning crimson. I dropped my ass into his chest to further restrict him. That's when I heard the pump of the shotgun. What the hell is going on? I whipped my head around. A man stood on the other side of the gate, looking down the barrel at me. This is my dad, I said. You ought to treat him better than that. You don't understand. Nope, I don't. Don't want to. Also don't want any trouble. So how about you climb off that old man, get in your car, and get out of here? I clambered to my feet. I offered Dad a hand, but he slapped it away. While he rose, I dusted off. The rancher kept the gun on us and watched as we made our way to the car and climbed in. I thought about telling the guy that Dad used to own his place, but that would have been even more absurd. I fired up the car and we left. Silence again carried us along, back to Split Rail and over the butte to the highway. The bumpiest part of the ride and our day, I hoped. Behind us, I said softly, I'm sorry. About what? All of it, but mostly about the fight. You okay? You can't hurt me. I had no stomach for another go-round. Not now. What had Cindy told me? Don't take the bait. What had I done? I took it. Besides, he could hurt me. I could match him fuck you for fuck you, but that didn't matter when they were the only words we knew. I'd said it behind his back for years, and now I proved that I could say it to his face. A useless skill. Our words expended, we remained poles apart.
Fathers and sons, one of the great themes. Great themes. We have time for a question or two. Would anybody like to ask a question of our authors?
Chickens.
I'll ask the question. I'm great at nonfiction, but I've never been able to do fiction because I can't get that dialogue. And you all seem to be so good at that dialogue. What part of it do you struggle with, or do you?
Just put in some swear words.
That's gold.
It's
That's a good effing question right there.
yeah, Yeah, I've read a lot about it, and the only conclusion I come to is you got it or you don't got it. It is a
You got it
skill.
what?
You got it or you don't got it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very, I don't know that you can teach it.
Well, isn't it something that the character starts
You can
on?
mimic. Yeah.
Your characters, your non-real characters become real characters in your mind, and they start talking.
But there's also, I'm sorry to interrupt, there's also in your dialogue, the thing that I love is that when you're reading out loud, I see the father, I see Ben, I recognize who's talking, even if you don't say, Ben said. So somehow there's a gift in there of making that conversation come alive.
Yeah, I think if anything, if you're trying to learn to do it in your own mind or for your own writing, you push yourself to say, what would this character's word choice be? How would it be different from that one? Start trying to differentiate and just, there are a lot of ways to say, anything. Would a person say that's a beautiful sunset, or when they say, well, it's not bad?
You all three did an excellent job.
One more question? Thank you. So now the writers will migrate out to the signing table. So come on out and visit with them one-on-one. And oh yes, by the way, buy a book or two. Just a thought. Thank you guys. That's great.